Hey guys, Dylan from Noble Records coming at you with another video. This is one about the White Album and a recent copy that I got a hold of that is very interesting. It's a very rare edition of it that I think you'll enjoy the story behind. Before we get started, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, send me a comment. Love to stay in touch with you guys. Also, if you have Instagram, we have a record store in Matthews, North Carolina called Noble Records. Follow us on Instagram at Noble Records. So anyways, the White Album is my favorite Beatles album. Always has been. I love it. I love finding an original White Album. We find a lot of them at the shop. Very frequently we find them in all different conditions. A lot of times they're in bad shape. But the White Album is an album that even now, even though it's one of the greatest albums ever and there's tons of them out there, there's a lot of misconceptions about the White Album and the original pressings and the value and the mixes and all that stuff. So through the course of this video, we're going to talk about this really crazy story about this White Album that was kind of a lost White Album that's almost impossible to find. We'll talk about other interesting pressings of the White Album, and at the end I'll kind of talk about what White Albums are worth now. So many of you, I know people ask me all the time, what's my White Album worth? We'll get to that towards the end. First off, a lot of people do complain about the cost of new records today, but in 1968 when the White Album was released, the MSRP on them was $11.98, which in today's money, if you put that into an inflation calculator in 2023, that's $107.86 would be the cost of it today. So that's just an insane amount of money for a record. And there's records that come out that are very expensive, but very few are that expensive now. But the White Album was highly anticipated when it came out, and there's a lot of, because the Beatles were the biggest band in the world, there's a bunch of different mixes and stuff like that. And I'll get into all of that like later in the video. If you want to stick around after the story, I've got a bunch of different copies of the White Album that I can show you that are in my collection. Since it's my favorite Beatles album, I have amassed quite a few over the years. So the story goes like this. October 16th, 1968, George Harrison is in LA. He was helping produce Jackie Lomax's record. And while he was there, he wanted to listen to the White Album. So he wasn't present when they chose the song order for the White Album. So they had already recorded all the songs, but they hadn't put them together in the right order yet, or the order that we know. And so he hadn't heard it yet in that order. And so he went by Capitol Studios to listen to the album, and they had a different mastering in the US than it did in the UK, and we'll get to that. But as he sat down to listen to that White Album, he was just appalled by how bad it sounded to him. The mastering engineers there, apparently, they ran a lot of master tapes through like a limiter, and they had run it through a limiter and kind of stripped some of the high and low end off of a lot of these songs, and it's taken away some of the effects that they used. And George Harrison just felt like it kind of stripped the album of a lot of the charm that it had and a lot of the intricacies that they put in to that. So he demanded that all those lacquers be destroyed, that he could help them remaster the album so it could sound the way that they intended for it to sound. So they did it. It's George Harrison. You got to listen to the man. So they destroyed all the lacquers. So if you're not familiar with the record making process, from the master tape, you get the lacquers. Now from the lacquers, that makes the stamper, and so the lacquers are the step before the stampers that are made, and that's what presses it into a record. And so at this point, 33 sets of lacquers had been made. So he said, destroy them all. We're going to start all over. So, 99.9% of the time you find a White Album and it's a US White Album. If you look at the matrix number, which is the number between the label and the last groove of the record, it has, a number in there that tells you where it was pressed and all that stuff. So all those numbers are going to be J42 or whatever. Like none of the numbers go under 33 because the first 33 lacquers were destroyed. So they thought. So up until 2007, no one knew much about this story, and in 2007, there was a White Album that was found that had, it was from the Scranton pressing plant, that had a A28 number in the dead wax. So that means that was the 28th lacquer, so it was under 33, so it had to have the alternate mix that George Harrison hated. So in 2007, Perry Cox's record book came out, and it was price guide for pricing out Beatles records, and that talked about some rarities and things like that in there. And he described one that they had found that had this A28 as being a VG minus copy, so not very good shape. And at that point in time, that was the only one that was known to exist. Over the years, a handful have surfaced on eBay or whatever, and one went for 10 grand, you know? And so the prices have kind of gone all over the place for those. There's not really known how many copies are out there, but a couple websites I looked at said that 5 were known to exist, and one said 7 were known to exist. I have a hard time believing that that's all there is, but in any case, it's a very rare, maybe the rarest version of the White Album. This is how you identify this pressing. Now, it's a possibility that some of you will run to your B's in your record collection and pull out the White Album and check, and you might actually have it. You know, odds are there's more of these out there than people know, but most people that have records probably don't, you know, scour over their matrix numbers, trying to obsess over which pressing they have. There's plenty of record collectors that do that, trust me, but I think, you know, the average one probably doesn't that much. But here's how you identify which one it is. So as I was saying before, the matrix numbers, the matrix number right in the middle right here, the A side will read the SWBO 101. That's the catalog number, so that'll be on every side. So the A side will read SWBO 101 B29, and then the rest of the sides will end with either a A28 or B29 or whatever. So that's kind of the matrix numbers. And then there's also the IAM symbol on there, which is the Scranton symbol for all the records that were pressed in Scranton. There's millions and millions and millions of records pressed in Scranton. Lots of White Albums have that symbol on it, but that symbol don't mean nothing if you don't have the A28, the B28, the B29 on the dead wax. So that's how you can kind of identify this pressing. Fast forward till a few months ago, Logan's at the shop, my shop manager, and he calls me. He says, "Dylan, you're not going to believe this." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "We got this White Album, and it's like a really rare version of it." I was like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, it's like this George Harrison lost mix or whatever." And I was like, I remember where I was standing. I have chickens. I was sitting out there feeding the chickens, and I was like, "You got to be kidding me." Because I knew exactly what it was. I'd heard the story before. And he's like, "Yeah, it's like a super mega rare one. Like I think one that was in G+ condition sold for $1,000 on Discogs. But, but beyond the monetary value of it, whatever, I'd always wanted to find one, but it's one of those things that you just would never find because of the rarity, obviously." And so I was like, don't lose that. I'll be right over. So, we get, like I said, we get a lot of White Albums, and I was like, don't get it mixed up with any other White Albums. I'll be right over. So, it's been camped out at the shop for a few weeks, and, Logan's been trying to get me to not take it home, but what are you going to do? I took it home. I got it right here, and I just listened to it. So thankfully, this is a really clean copy. The jacket's not the best, but it's still really not bad. But the discs are at least VG+. They're very, very clean. And as far as White Albums go, it's a very clean. It's just hard to find them this clean originals. So I put them in, I cleaned them and put them in these sleeves. Anyways, as I listened to the album, I just sat down, didn't have anything else going on, just sat down and listened to the White Album. I haven't done it in a while. It was nice to get to do, but I could definitely see what he meant by it kind of stripping some of the intimacy out of it. Like it just kind of, it dulled it down, especially on Helter Skelter. And that was mentioned. A lot of people will say that. So I was really listening for Helter Skelter. That's my favorite. It's probably my favorite Beatles song ever. And I listened to it because I know that song really well, you know, and I know what it's supposed to sound like. And it was just like, it was like it had been gutted, you know. It was just not, it wasn't as powerful. It wasn't thumping, you know. And so I definitely understand why George Harrison decided to pull those. So it's just a rare version of it. It's very cool. What it's worth, I don't know. You know what they say. And a record's only worth what someone will pay for it. Who knows? Doesn't really matter, because right now I'm going to hang on to it. The Beatles' White Album being my favorite album is a very cool part of Beatles history, to have this album. The odds of finding another one is very rare, and especially in this condition is probably a once in a lifetime find. So it's hanging out with me for a while. But I wanted to show you some other White Albums that you might think is interesting, and a few that I really love. So I have this, which I looked for a copy of this forever since I'm in the US. These are hard to find. This is a first UK mono. And, you know, a lot of people will have them, you know, they look for certain numbers. I've never really gone into that. Let me tell you, with the White Album, you can go down so many rabbit holes with like numbers and different mixes and all this stuff, like the serial number on the front and all that stuff. I haven't really gone to that. I don't really care that much, but it opens up, and what's cool is if you're used to the US White Album, this is what they call a top loader. So it loads from the top. Now I have these in the MoFi sleeves, but it loads in that way instead of from the side like the US version does. But the original had these sweet black sleeves instead of the white ones, and they're the top loaders. So this is a really nice first UK mono White Album. Now in the US, they decided to only do stereo. So there's no US mono White Albums. They only did the stereo mix. So this is a White Album that I had that's just the cleanest one I've ever found. And these covers, you know, you can always see a little bit of ring wear. You can clean those up. I just haven't cleaned this one up. But this is like no seam splits, which there's always some seam splits right there. No seam splits, no nothing. And the vinyl is near mint on this. So the vinyl is the main reason why this is just the cleanest one I've ever found, with all the posters and postcards and all that stuff. And then this one is one that I found last year, and holy moly, I love it. This is not white at all. This is one that somebody sold me their collection, and they were laughing about it. And they're like, yeah, we just would be listening to the album, and we drew more and more and more until we kind of covered the whole thing up. And there's a whole world of people that collect albums that are vandalized, because it's kind of like folk art. There's weird collectors for everything, but look at this thing. There's, you know, the spine's still white, but the rest of it, and even on the inside, you have all sorts of art on there, because it's such a blank canvas. It's begging to be drawn on. And the art on this one is so cool because it says, you know, this is a magical mystery tour. Start here. And you start here, and it says follow the line. And it kind of tells the story of the Beatles and the different albums and stuff like that. You got Ram. You got the Beatles' second album, Yellow Submarine, the Rooftop Concert, all this stuff, Rubber Soul. So it goes and tells like the whole story of the Beatles. This is such a cool, you know, I've had thousands of Beatles White Albums in my life, and this is the coolest one. For sure, the most interesting artwork that I've ever seen on them. And I know some people that collect, you know, the artwork and stuff. There's a gentleman named Rutherford Chang that has, if you know, he collects White Albums. I think he has like 3,200 right now. I follow him on Instagram, and every time he gets another one, he just posts a picture of it. It's a really cool Instagram page. But I have sold a lot of White Albums to him over the years because he collects the first pressing with the numbered, you know, the serial number and everything. And so I have sold him tons and tons over the years. And so I'm sure he loves to get them that are like that have like, that are all different artwork and stuff like that. So, but this one was too cool. I couldn't sell it. This is one I found in a storage unit a few years ago, and I've not ever seen one like this. You know, this is the Beatles White Album, and it's on white vinyl, which I have found tons of White Albums on white vinyl. They reissued them on white vinyl, but this one is the Weiss pressing, the DMM Weiss pressing. I've never seen one with that sticker. There's an entry for it on Discogs, but the one's never been sold, so who knows what it's worth. Kind of a rare one, I think, but whatever. It's just kind of, I wanted to have one on white vinyl. They also did a original master recording MoFi version of the White Album, which I have in this Beatles collection box set. It's the original master recordings for all the Beatles records. And that's kind of debated on, you know, which version sounds better or whatever. Some people don't like the MoFi version, some people love it. But this is the one that's kind of regarded as the best sounding version right now. And that is the 2014 mono. This is, you know, they did the Beatles mono box sets. Those are going for a ton of money because they haven't reissued them in a long time. Hopefully they'll reissue them soon so people can get them. But these sound absolutely fantastic. 2014 mono. Stunning, stunning listen. So, and what you're wondering now probably is, what is my White Album worth? You know, you've got a White Album at home. What is it worth? So if you're in the U.S. and you have a U.S. pressing, they can be worth anywhere from $10 to, I would say, maybe $150. Very rarely are they as nice as this one. This one, you know, I've seen them in this condition that are clean like that. This one has all the stuff in it, and I can pull it out and show you. This one doesn't have any seam splits, nothing like that. It's got it right in the middle here. It's got this poster that's with them, and then the portraits. So these are all 4 portraits with them, you know, of each Beatle. And when they're like that and they have all the goodies inside and they're in really, really, really nice shape, no scratches, no nothing, they can go for $150 or so. Usually they don't go for a whole lot more than that unless there's some numbers that are below 10,000. Sometimes those can go for a lot of money, but 9 times out of 10, you know, 99% of the time, I'll say it's a scale from $10 to $150 for a U.S. pressing. It depends on the condition, you know, and that's just kind of the way the market is right now. A lot of people think, I've got the Beatles White. I hear so many people say, I've got the Beatles White Album. Like, it's like, you know, they made millions of them. So, it's not like they're a diamond in the rough, a gem that you're never going to find. They're out there. The hardest thing's kind of to find them in good condition. Now, you may say, my White Album doesn't have the number. So all the subsequent pressings, you know, the reissues, they did numbers on those like that. But the later pressings, like the late 70s pressings and stuff, they took off the serial number. So there's not a serial number. Like on the one that I have here, that's the white vinyl version. It has no serial number. So a lot of those don't. Usually the white vinyl versions, they're kind of all over the place. But I say in good shape, they're worth at least $75 and up. It just depends. Some of those can be worth a little bit. But on average, I think the U.S. White Album on white vinyl is $75 to $100 normally. So, and then the Beatles UK mono is worth more than the US stereo is worth. You know, I've seen those go for a few $100 and up, just depends on the condition. So, a lot of people ask what they're worth, and I know it's about the music. You know, we shouldn't be talking about all the numbers all the time, and I totally agree with that. For me, the White Album I absolutely love the album. I love everything about it. It's been a favorite of mine since I was a kid. I don't talk about the Beatles much, because in the Beatles universe, there's so much to know, and there's so many people that know so much more than I do that I don't really feel like I can share much that hasn't been said already. But there's not a video about this on YouTube yet. So I'm excited to tell the story of the lost George Harrison White Album and show you this copy that I found that I'm probably going to hang on to for a little while. It's just such a cool thing. For me, it's just a cool part of the story. So for me, collecting is partly because of the sound quality, partly because I just like records, and partly because of the historical aspect of holding this album, that you wonder where it's been and you wonder, you know, how many people have owned it and where it was pressed and all that stuff. It's a nerd thing, but I like it, you know. So anyways, if you guys like this video, if any of it resonated with you, please hit that like button. Send me a comment. I would love to hear from you guys. Hit the subscribe button. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Check out some of my other videos. We'll see you guys next time.